welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. He is Daniel Gallen. We are still inside Beaver Stadium. We just finished up our post-game coverage, had our press conference with James Franklin, caught up with a bunch of players following a 27-11 victory for the number 7 Nittany Lions over UCLA. It wasn't the blowout margin that we ultimately expected, although UCLA wasn't able to get into the end zone until the final minute of the matchup after things had been well decided. Daniel, 5-0 is the result. Next week, things get really interesting, a big national spotlight as they'll go out and they'll play USC, who came into this weekend at number 11 nationally. But when we focus on this matchup, I think people are going to want a little bit more, and they're going to want more information on Nick Singleton. So we'll do our best to provide both of those in terms of maybe what the Nittany Lions can improve upon moving forward, what they impressed us with today, and what we think about the status of number 10 after he did not play in Beaver Stadium today.
Definitely. I think to look at things big picture first is that we all thought that we'd see more. I think that the defense ended up being what we expected. I know both of us picked UCLA to score only 6 points. They end up with only 11 on the board, and James Franklin was quick to point out post-game that only 3 of those came against the starting defense. And so I think that's what you expected to see. As for the offense, I think we expected to see a little bit more. And I think that it's really hard to, not factor in not having Nick Singleton out there. I know that when Singleton wasn't at practice on Wednesday night and the discussion of his status started, he's listed as questionable, pregame availability report. There's that line of thinking that's like, we can beat UCLA without him. Let's put him in bubble wrap for next week. We'll be fine. Like, things will keep going. But I think that Singleton is the type of player who has the type of talent and is playing at such a high level right now that you take him away and it really does change things. Things change in a big way. You lose that home run hitting dynamic. I think that you look at how today went, especially for Penn State on the ground. You could have used a home run hitter. That's not to take away anything from Kaytron Allen really grinding things out. But you take, like, Nick Singleton is someone where you can't just be like, okay, we're going to take him away and things will be fine. I know that Penn State has built up depth. They've built up talent, but a lot of that is around Nick Singleton, and Nick Singleton being out there makes Kaytron Allen better. Kaytron Allen being out there makes Nick Singleton better, etc. So I think that was the big takeaway from me. Mm-hmm. Based on what James Franklin said, this was kind of sounded like almost as much of a surprise to him as it was to us. He said that he found out after pregame warmups, and they're in the locker room, that Singleton wasn't going to go. And we also kind of found out when the game started and we saw him on the sideline without his helmet. So definitely, I think, an extra layer to dissect things today.
Yeah, we'll dive into the game flow, who shined for Penn State, maybe where they can improve upon. There were some changes made as well. Punt returner, place kicker. We'll talk about all that, but I think we need to lead with Singleton. And because he referenced, he really has been an MVP type of player over the course of this season with his ability to be that field stretcher. He was not that for so much of last season. We've rehashed that a bunch, but that season is getting further and further in the rearview mirror, and he is really looking like the game changer that we knew he was as a freshman, that we thought he was going to be when he was the All-American Player of the Year. And so when you look at kind of how it went today on the ground, and we'll get into a little bit more, but Penn State's longest run was for 11 yards. That was from Kaytron Allen. Singleton was averaging almost 8 yards per carry through 4 games, and that includes 3 40-yard pickups, so 40 yards or longer. He also had this is kind of maybe an underrated part of what he's done. He's had a 13-yard or longer reception every single week too. So you're talking about at least a first down moment. In some cases, it's been him reaching the end zone as a receiver. And so he's been a really special player. You go now 6 consecutive games, he's over 100 yards as a rusher / receiver. The last 5 regular season games, he's over 100 yards per game. He's over 7 yards per carry. So whatever slump he was dealing with, and however much you want to attribute that to the last offensive coordinator, that's behind us. And now what we have in front of us is Penn State's going to be preparing for pretty epic showdown. And people are going to be talking about this game a lot nationally. There's going to be a true buzz around it. And the centerpiece is going to be, is Nick Singleton available? And Nick Singleton, it's going to be easy to make comparisons. If he's playing against USC and he does something special, people are going to think back to Saquon Barkley doing that in the Rose Bowl not too long ago, because we saw Nick Singleton, by the way, in the Rose Bowl 2 years ago, showcase that breakaway ability. You laid it out pretty well. I mean, James Franklin told us straight up, he thought Thursday Nick Singleton was going to play. He thought on Friday Nick Singleton was going to play. When he walks into the stadium today, behind all of his players and behind the Penn State band with the fans surrounding him, in his mind, Nick Singleton is going to play today. Nick Singleton was announced as a starter along with Kaytron Allen on the big screen here in Beaver Stadium to all of us. And Nick Singleton was out there in his uniform going through pregame warmups with Kaytron Allen and company. And then ultimately, James Franklin says they're in the locker room in that very small period between pregame warmups and when they show back up to run onto the field and get ready for kickoff. And Franklin gets word from running backs coach Jaywan Sider and their head athletic trainer that Nick Singleton would not be available today. And so I think there's something that we're never going to fully grasp here is how much of this was perhaps precautionary in protecting Nick Singleton beyond this Saturday, especially knowing what you have around the horizon with USC next week. But at the same time, we just witnessed, what it looks like when you pluck Nick Singleton out of this offense. So naturally, the question will be, well, is he reinserted to things? And I want to remind people, we had Nick Singleton for an interview on Tuesday. I mean, we spoke with him this week. That never happens. If guys are like injured or at risk of not playing, we're not going to talk to them. I mean, that's typically the case in my 8 years covering the team. So I really think the Penn State football program today was surprised not to have Singleton available. And naturally, when you have limited time, James Franklin said, not really anything you can do to the game plan when you're running onto the field to go for the matchup. And he said with Kaytron Allen, it was an opportunity to get him more work. He was the true number one running back today. He tied his career high with 21 carries. And they were able to get freshman Quentin Martin involved. But all due respect to those guys, neither of them looked like Nick Singleton in terms of the impact today. And I do think that Kaytron Allen is better when Nick Singleton is sharing the workload with him. And I do think that Nick Singleton is better when he's sharing the workload with Kaytron Allen because of the way they complement each other from a style standpoint as well. And so ultimately today, Kaytron Allen under 4 yards per carry. He did reach the end zone, but he's about 5.5 yards per carry coming into this matchup. And so we got one carry from Quentin Martin, got a few catches. He had one nice one where he showed some physicality. But I'm not convinced that he's a guy you can plug and just say he's going to be, Nick Singleton Jr. out there. So this is a tremendous storyline all of a sudden, but it's also one that reading the room, unless Penn State continues to be surprised into the upcoming week, really expectations are that Nick Singleton would be in the mix to play. And I'd be surprised if we didn't see him on the practice field Wednesday. But now we got to kind of wait and see, as opposed to where we were kind of coming to this game. And that was the anticipation was, he's going to play, and that's what the anticipation was for Penn State too.
Yeah, this is one of those things where I don't get the impression that anything was really held back from us in terms of trying to get that competitive advantage. And we talked about the question that Mark asked James Franklin on Wednesday night and how the answer to that question indicated that Nick Singleton would be available today. Some reporting nationally from 24/7 Sports on Friday, some stuff that we heard locally also pointed to that. So, I mean, this is one of those things where you went through the audio and listened to some of the other Penn State players, and when they found out Nick wasn't going to be available, and sounded like they were taken by surprise a little bit too. So
Drew Aller was the one. I mean, I included that in the story I wrote about Singleton, and I as soon as I was going through the audio, I turned to you, Daniel, and I said, Drew Aller ran onto the field for the first possession and didn't know Nick Singleton wasn't available. He said, well, it's Kaytron Allen with me. But, he's used to one or the other being out there. Sometimes it's both of them. But he was asked, well, so no one said to you, Nick's not going to go? And he said no. And basically was like, once I saw Nick still wasn't coming out there, I figured he wasn't going to be. And so I thought –
I think we were the same way.
Like when QB1 is telling us he ran out there with the offensive attack and didn't realize that kind of a threat was going to be, absent from that. I think that really tells you that this was as James Franklin said, I'll quote him, a last minute deal.
Yeah. And I think it was kind of the same deal for us too, where by the time we got to later in the first quarter and into the second quarter, it was kind of like, oh, okay, like this is the way that things are going. And so, we'll see if we get any other sort of transparency from James Franklin or Nick Singleton in the future. I'm not holding my breath just because of how this program handles things, and that's their right. And personally, like, if we could find out a little bit more about the process, and I thought that James Franklin was pretty transparent about things today in terms of, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, today, thinking that he'd be there. I thought that was a little revealing. But we'll see what this means. But yeah, I mean, I think just to go back to my point to, I guess, put a bow on this, like, I think that it shows the value of a Nick Singleton. And I also think that this game flow, it was a scoreless tie after the first quarter. You're more than halfway through the second quarter before Penn State scores its first touchdown. It just goes back to the thing that I know when James Franklin during his opening statements, some people might tune some things out, but when he has that one line where he's like, we won today. You look around college football, a lot of teams weren't as fortunate. We have to appreciate that. I think that this sort of the game that you think of, and that pops up into my head for me, like kind of I know that we thought that Penn State would roll. I tried to qualify my predictions a little bit by saying like a Power 4 opponent, even one this bad, it feels like a little wrong to do this, but I just think it goes back to the thing where, it's like they get paid too. These are D1 athletes on scholarship. Like the idea of just like punting on a game and being like, oh yeah, we got this. I think like the only time you could really do that is against Kent State. I think that like going into a UCLA game in terms of fan and media mindset, like I think that the possibility of not having Nick Singleton got like a little overlooked, I think.
Yeah, I think ultimately, I really don't walk away thinking UCLA is a much better team than we projected they would be. I think Justin Martin really showed a lot. I think he's going to give that Bruins staff something to consider at the quarterback position moving forward, especially early, facing some pressure, throwing the ball. He was moving the ball down the field. That was surprising to us because that was a big part of the slow start for Penn State. It was the fact that you saw UCLA's team slumping and with this first-time starting quarterback who Penn State's got to go back 3 years to his high school film to get any kind of read on him. All of a sudden he's like 8 of 10 through the first couple of possessions, and he's kind of rolling. Not a lot of big plays, but he looked comfortable enough to move them down the field. And UCLA drove down the field on their first possession and took a lot of time off the clock. And ultimately, at the end of that first quarter, UCLA had more than 10 minutes of possession. But during that trip that they had deep downfield, they got aggressive there, had a fourth and short inside the 20. And ultimately, the defense, notably Zakee Wheatley, out of the safety position, able to come up with a stop on the ground and turn them away. And that would kind of be a deciding factor in this matchup, is Penn State's defense standing tall when UCLA was able to have some threatening moments. But I do feel like I'm not even going to really entertain people who say that Penn State was threatened today. It was 27-3 in the final minute of the game. I think Penn State left some things on the field offensively specifically, and I think they were without arguably their best piece on the offensive side of the field. So, did they go out and stop UCLA and sprint their way toward Los Angeles next week in a way that people wanted to see, and maybe as emphatic of a fashion? No, but I thought ultimately their defense did what their defense has done, Daniel, and that was really the cornerstone of this one. It looks a little shaky early on, and we saw it first possession against Illinois. We saw it early against UCLA today. We saw some blown coverage in the second quarter there. Tamia Robinson trailing Harden, the running back, for a 53-yard gain. But they kept it to a field goal there. But this is a team that has really found answers in each one of these games defensively, and it's helped carry them to the finish line. And it was a big part of the reason that when the offense isn't quite landing all its punches in a way that we anticipated, UCLA is still not jabbing at you in a way that's got people across the country focused in on Happy Valley and saying, what's wrong with Penn State? How are they having so much trouble? No one's going to be pleased entirely with this performance today, but this isn't one that I think national perception, Penn State takes some kind of a blow because of it.
Definitely. I think that this Penn State defense, it felt like even though UCLA was moving the ball a little bit early, like you said, you just didn't feel threatened. I mean, the biggest play was that play to Harden up the left side. That really felt like UCLA's only chunk play. I know that they had some gains on like third and long and some completions over the middle into some soft spots on the Penn State defense, but it just never.
Daniel, I can give you a stat real quick. Their longest completion aside from that was 18 yards. They had 18
Mhm.
yarder, they had a 12-yarder. All the other completions were under 10 yards. So yeah, that really was the big chunk play in the pass attack.
And I think the thing that demonstrates just kind of how overmatched this UCLA offense was is you look at that last touchdown drive that they go on, where you're down 27-3. It's 8 minutes left in the fourth quarter, and you go on a 16 play drive that takes 8 minutes. Like in that situation, where hypothetically you should have some urgency, there should be, some oomph behind everything. But it was just the Penn State defense, and that's even with the Penn State backups in the secondary and at the second level, they still just made things difficult for UCLA and made them have to take that long to get up the field. I know that Deshaun Foster had a couple coaching decisions today that I
Can
think
we
we
just
had
talk about the one that we absolutely hated?
end of the first half.
Yeah, awful.
Yeah, yeah. I in my instant analysis, I wrote that was the turning point for me right there, because like I came in and I thought that on that opening drive, UCLA goes for it on that first fourth down, they get it, and then they ultimately got stopped on the Wheatley one. But that was me being. I saw that and I was like, okay, like this is they're out here, like they're here to play. You're a 28-point underdog. You haven't even been in this. You've been in this time zone for like what, like 16 hours, however long it's been. Like you're here and you're pushing it, like you're trying. But then before half, like you're down 14-3, you do a give up draw and get 14 yards and you're at your 39, you got one timeout. I think there was like 14 or 15 seconds left. And then you just let it go and go into the half. Like
Deshaun
that.
Foster just starts walking toward the locker room, and I'm just like, dude, you
Yeah.
have an opportunity. But I agree with you. 14-3, that late touchdown in the first half for Penn State's offense felt big. And then when you tacked on UCLA essentially taking a knee where they could have seized some momentum with getting the ball first and second half, to me, that was kind of a double gut punch to any kind of UCLA momentum that we may have seen them muster over the course of the afternoon.
Yeah, it's just try to force the issue a little bit. You've got one timeout. You got, try to, you can call the timeout there, reset, kind of get your plan together, and then, okay, let's try to pick up a chunk and then put ourselves in position for either a semi-reasonable Hail Mary or a long field goal, because I think their kicker's pretty good. So it was just one of those things where when that happened, I was like, okay, UCLA might not be as serious about this as I thought they were early on. It was just I think the one thing we talked about this like last year with some of James Franklin's decisions in like, I think it was the Ohio State game, where like if you're going to make these decisions, you have to go for it the entire time. Like you have to wed yourself to that philosophy. Like you can't pick and choose what spots you're going to be aggressive, what spots you're not going to be, because if you do that, it's an incongruous game plan, and that's where you kind of leave yourself open and just you're not cohesive. That's where you get got. And so that was just disappointing as like a viewer and someone who is interested in the mechanics of football.
Yeah, that was a bizarre choice, and we'll leave that to the UCLA site in our network and their post-game podcast, and
They
it's
can
going to
have
be
me on to
with
talk
them.
about it.
Yeah, them and Deshaun Foster in year one. They've got a long way to go and getting acclimated to the Big Ten Conference. But focusing back on the offense, we spent a ton of time at the top of this episode about who was not on the field for them. But once they got rolling, and specifically Drew Aller started looking real sharp downfield. But the first couple possessions, 3 and out to start. The next possession ends with the sack on Drew Aller, which we haven't seen much of this year. And I noted this to you, but on the first 5 plays on offense, they had 3 different players taking the snap at quarterback. You had Drew Aller, you had Bo Prabula, and then you had Tyler Warren. And good things have happened when Tyler Warren gets the ball, generally, however you can. But it just felt like Drew Aller was lacking. Even, a guy who just found out, or maybe didn't quite found out, that he wasn't going to have Nick Singleton for the day. and then you're kind of moving him around the field. And it just, I felt like it took a little while for him to really get into that rhythm, and not to his fault. It just felt like that's kind of what was being dictated around him and by the coaching staff. But once he got settled in, he was dialed in. And Daniel, 2 long touchdown drives to put them ahead 14-3. You had UCLA get a big chunk play in between and end up getting that field goal in between Penn State's touchdowns. But 14 points before halftime felt big, and he was spraying the ball around. It was Liam Clifford, went over 100 yards today, first time in his career, and he's been on a roll lately. Julian Fleming got involved downfield. Tyler Warren, of course, who got in the end zone again today, more touchdowns than any tight end in Penn State history now, passing Pat Freiermuth. He has 17 total. And additionally, Harrison Wallace, who's been very reliable, steady, has not had the breakout performance again since the West Virginia matchup, but he's been there when Drew Aller has looked his way. And I think that's the thing. Franklin mentioned this again in postgame. When this passing game has been at its best, Drew Aller has been looking all over the field. That wasn't something that showed up last year. It's now doing that. And they didn't have back-to-back weeks now where they didn't have a bunch of those downfield explosive plays. And I know for some people, maybe they're going to get shades of what happened last year, is that yards per attempt goes down a little bit. And we'll see. I think USC is going to be a good time to test that. But to me, I thought Drew Aller, working with what he had today, not even realizing he was going to be shorthanded going onto the field, really was able to kind of be the stabilizing figure. And that's what we said he was going to need to be at times this year. And I thought he, for a long stretch of this game, I thought it might be Kaytron Allen, but he never really had that kind of a presence. I thought he was pretty clearly the most important figure on the field. I know that's easy to say about a quarterback, but I felt like if he had kind of blinked in this moment, it may have opened the door for the Bruins, and he didn't. He put together 2 really polished touchdown drives to close out the half, and he was finding his guys with authority across the field.
Definitely. When you talk about that as like him being the most important player on the field, for the Penn State offense today, it's like last week they didn't need him to be Superman or do, anything out of the ordinary against Illinois. And then today you need him to do a little bit more. And while the stats don't really wow you, 17, 24, 237, like that 71% completion percentage, still on trend with where he was earlier in the year. They still hit on a couple of those deep balls. You talk about what Liam Clifford did, 3 for 107, catches of 24, 26, and 57. Like those are some solid chunk plays. That's hitting one of those deep shots that we talk about wanting to see from this Penn State offense. And so I think that in terms of the passing game, I think you still saw like a little bit of everything. You saw Tyler Warren down in the red zone. You saw the deep shot to Clifford. You saw Trey Wallace return to that role of not only moving the chains, but making some things happen after the catch when he had it. You saw Julian Fleming make some things happen with the ball in his hands, almost get into the end zone.
He was so close. I mean, this crowd really wanted that for him. And I said, just let him take a direct snap and run into the end zone, because it would be great to see Julian Fleming score a touchdown at Beaver Stadium. It didn't happen during this homestand 4 games, but he has been a guy that's made plays. He's played a ton of football. He's been on the field a lot for the offense, but he's starting to pop up and making plays downfield for Drew Aller more and more.
Definitely. And then you have Omari Evans, who 1 catch for 3 yards. So that big time yards per catch is coming down a little bit. Meanwhile, you blink and Liam Clifford's averaging 22.5 yards per catch this season. But Omari Evans, they dialed up a deep shot for him, and you get the defensive holding penalty out of it. And so he's a known quantity, someone who is, these defenses are focused on. And so I think very quietly, this receiver group has rounded itself out. One of the point that the players were making post game, I think Trey Wallace was that these guys can do a lot of different things. I think if we talked about which wide receiver was going to have a 50-yard catch today, of like the top 4, I think Liam Clifford might have been number 4 of that group. And we've talked about it with Harrison Wallace, where he has that reputation as this freaky athletic deep threat guy, but he can be super steady for you. And then I think Drew Aller made the point that Omari Evans does a lot of stuff underneath for them and has the potential to. He's not just run in a straight line really fast. And so I think very quietly, these guys have shown what they can do. They keep putting more and more and more on tape for these opposing offensive coordinators. I know that we talk a lot about or opposing defensive coordinators. I know we talk a lot about what Andy Kotelnicki is putting on tape in terms of these personnel packages and different formations, like all these different sets. But I think that you can't discount what the players themselves are showing that they can do. And I think that that's been a very quiet development for Drew Aller and this passing game.
And today, the snap distribution among those top 4 wide receivers was as equally spread as we've seen it. It's always been pretty in the same ballpark. No one's been far and away, but sometimes there's been Harrison Wallace and Fleming maybe having 15 to 20 more snaps. Today, just going through the initial snap counts, you've got Fleming, Wallace, Clifford, and Evans all within about 10 snaps of each other, and no one had a ton. So these guys should be relatively fresh going on the road against USC. And speaking of the tight end play, I know that we talked about Luke Reynolds being an ascending figure, but I think we got an answer today, and it felt like we were starting to get one last week, that Khalil Dinkins is really that tight end too right now. Last week, I know Reynolds started, but he played about half the snaps as Dinkins behind Morin. Today, it was actually Dinkins who got the starting nod. I believe it was his first career start as a redshirt junior now, and he played quite a bit more than Luke Reynolds. So just some housekeeping notes there as we go through the offense. But Daniel, I think getting back over to some of the points that were produced, that first touchdown revealed Ryan Barker as the place kicker. He later went on to kick a couple field goals, one from 25. Okay, that's good. Later from 40, which is the exact distance that Sanders Sahaydak missed twice from last week in a close game against Illinois. Barker hit the 40-yarder, heads into the locker room, feeling pretty good about himself, I'd imagine. A guy who joined the program last year as an in-state high school product, a walk-on player, and Sanders Sahaydak, much different background. He was considered the number 1 kicker recruit in 24/7 Sports rankings coming out of high school. What do you make of Ryan Barker's debut, the decision by James Franklin, and how this maybe changes the whole arithmetic of what we view about special teams play from Penn State?
It's what you needed to see. Like, it's not just what you wanted to see from the kicking game in Penn State. It's what you needed to see going on the road to USC, knowing you've got Wisconsin and Ohio State coming up next. I talk about it all the time. Like, you can't leave points on the field. You can't lose games on the margins, through special teams. I think that that's just such a big part of this if Penn State wants to get where it wants to go. So I think seeing Ryan Barker out there, I thought that I'll have to look back at the TV copy to see how straight he was. I think someone on our board said the 40-yarder was dead center down the middle.
Someone that I trust very well texted me afterwards, and we don't have a great vantage point from the press box. He said prettiest kick of the year for Penn State. And I thought it was just kind of a joke because it was relieving some stress for fans out there. But he actually he said it was just a very good kick.
and it felt like too that his extra points were going over the netting in the back, or like behind the uprights, so, and into the student section. So I think there's some leg there. We know that Sahaydak has such a rare leg just from seeing what he's done in warmups, hearing it, being up close to it. But Barker showed that he can be consistent. If he can show he can be consistent, which this is the first step to doing that. Now you have to stack it. I think that's a good sign for Penn State. You talk about being on a bigger stage, crowd of 110,047 today, 10th largest crowd in Beaver Stadium history. So a stripe out environment. So something a little bit different than, say if he was on the field against Kent State or Bowling Green, something along those lines. So I think that step in the right direction. It's what you want to see from Penn State, but it's kind of like what we talked about with Sahaydak. Okay, you did it. Now you got to do it again. Like, he did it against Bowling Green, did it mostly against Kent State, couldn't do it against Illinois. So Ryan Barker, now you have to do this against USC.
And it's week to week, because you and I were sitting here 5 weeks ago saying Sahaydak hit a 40, actually he missed the 40-yard. We were talking about that after the Bowling Green game, right? We were saying, he's going to get his confidence, and then in the next week it doesn't happen, and all of a sudden we're back to square one. So Ryan Barker's got to build on it. Last year, we know Alex Felkins did, right? No one really thought Alex Felkins was going to have the season he did. He was a very different story as a grad transfer coming out of the Ivy League, and then he ends up getting the job week one, puts together a really strong season that got him some professional looks coming out of Penn State. So we will monitor that situation. It will certainly come up. And I actually had a chance to sit down with Ryan Barker during the offseason. Been holding on to that just in case something like this popped up. So I hope to share that story with you at Lions247.com early in this game week leading up to USC, which again, it's going to be expected to be a close game. Points are going to be very, very valuable in that matchup. And I wanted to get some more spotlight on the defense, Daniel, because again, negative 9 yards in the third quarter. James Franklin was very proud to bring up some stats after the game. And he mentioned throughout the entire season now, no points allowed in the third quarter, 1.9 yards per play allowed in the third quarter. And naturally, you're talking about after you give Tom Allen and the coaching staff, that chunk of time and the players a chunk of time to kind of recalibrate what they've showed up on the field with now 5 weeks in a row, Daniel, has been dominance. And again, that touchdown comes late, some inexperience on the field. Maybe that'll be valuable for some of those backups moving ahead. But we'll talk about some individual standouts. But collectively, this defense has done it in different ways. But I think one of the true calling cards is they will clean up their early messes and they will validate the excitement by showing you some really strong stretches of play.
There's almost like in that first quarter, if you're watching it and you're a Penn State fan, we see this on the board where you kind of enter this fog where it's near panic. I think for some people it is panic, but for a lot of people it's the stress of what's happening, like the uncertainty. And then suddenly you pick your head up, however many hours later, it's the fourth quarter and you're up by 3 scores. They haven't done anything since and things are like good. So I think that the totality of the defense has been excellent. I think outside of the Bowling Green game, first half of the Bowling Green game and that first drive against Illinois, I think things have been pretty fine, pretty good. You just have to figure out how to start a little quicker. Maybe the margin for error goes down against an offense like USC's at that talent level. But I think that for me, at least, I think that Tom Allen has the trust to get things righted. The staff has the trust to put this in the right direction. And this team and the talent does too.
Good defensive football can be pretty boring unless you love good defensive football. So I think people tend to remember bad defensive players a lot more than they do the good ones, and just solid stretches of defensive play. And something I noted to you tonight and Mark, I said it felt like just like the second half of the Illinois game. It felt like the second half of the Bowling Green matchup, and much of the West Virginia game. I feel like you kind of like look up, okay, West Virginia be trotting on the field, and then you look down and start typing on your computer. And all of a sudden, you'd realize that they're off the field again because it's time to punt. It was really an impressive ability to just kind of swat away UCLA when they needed to show that they were in control of the game. And obviously putting up some points on the board offensively did that. But the defense just really didn't leave much to question over the course of the second half of this matchup. And Daniel, let's close with a couple notes here. Generally, beyond the special teams focus of the kicker spot, we've been talking a lot about the punt return game. And Caden Saunders, not only was he not involved there today, but he was also in a boot on the sideline and out for this game, obviously. And so that's going to be something, his status, we got to monitor whether that's correlated to the preseason injury that was lingering and impacting him on the field this fall, or if this is something fresh. Regardless, it gave other guys an opportunity to return punts. Jake Spencer was involved out there. He's a transfer, Colgate, correct?
Yes.
And he's a guy who I haven't seen much on the field in terms of offensive role ever, but he got a chance out there. But it was really Zion Tracy who got several chances, and we expected him. There were a lot of UCLA punts today. And he was not shy. I think that was the one thing that stood out. He didn't make any obvious blunders that cost the team field position or put the ball in harm's way. And maybe upon a film review, maybe some things will stand out there. But I thought overall, you'd like some of the aggressiveness. I know he's got the goods, the elite athleticism. But again, when this is a spot that you can push an opponent with and really, put some strain on them and really set your offense up well and flip field position, I want to get a longer look at Zion Tracy in the big show next Saturday, because I think he's the kind of guy with the kind of personality and skill set where he can put that block in the back from last week in the back of people's mind and make sure they've got a new thought about this kid, because when he gets the ball in his hands, he only got a little bit of a look today. But I think he can do some really good things in this role. And I think to see him just get through it without making a bad decision or having a bad play where the ball hits the turf, that's going to give James Franklin motivation to say, okay, let's see what you can do next, versus saying, we cannot take this show on the road out to Los Angeles and risk a bad situation.
I think they put Zion Tracy in a good spot. Jake Spencer was out for the first punt, which he caught, I think, at the Penn State 18. And James Franklin said it was a punt safe situation. So they wanted him out there to fair catch. He's been at Penn State for a couple of years, but began his career at Colgate and was primarily their punt returner and kick returner down at the FCS level in the Patriot League. And so they put him out there. They knew he would get it. And then Zion Tracy in the second half got 3 opportunities, and it was a 2-yard return, a 9-yard return, and then a return for 0 yards where the guys were right on top of him. But I think the thing that stood out to me was how assertive he was in taking it. I think that he was empowered, it felt like, by the coaching staff to go out and try to make something happen. James Franklin said after the game that they think Zion Tracy can be a playmaker in that role. And so he just looked confident and assertive when he got the ball, and like that he wanted to do something with it. And I think that it's something that can burn you at times, but they put him in a situation where if something did happen, it wouldn't be the end of the world. Game flow helped with that as well, with the score. So I came away from it, being very intrigued by Zion Tracy, and I think comfortable with him back there. We'll see when they go to LA if they keep that sort of approach, where if it's a punt safe situation where they're backed up, Jake Spencer gets the call, just the fair catch, and Zion Tracy is out there to try to make something happen. But I think it's a step in the right direction for the special teams unit.
Before we get to some closing notes, Daniel, I do want to give a little focus individually to some defenders, because guys continue to flash. I don't know that we need to see 4 quarters of dominant work in some of these matchups to know that guys have taken the next step. And when it comes time, I mean, we saw it against Illinois, but when it comes time to buckle up the chin straps and go for all 60 minutes for this defense, I think we know where they can lean on. And I continue to look to this defensive front. Abdul Carter picking up another tackle and a half for loss. He's been stacking them up at a rate that he was not last year. So that's good to see. And then Dennis Sutton. I don't remember what the exact tweet was, but Friday evening, I believe, he tweeted something about the world's going to learn about Dennis Sutton tomorrow. And he said before, he likes to put stuff out there because speaking into existence, and also kind of put the pressure on himself. When he was an enrolling freshman, he tweeted, "I'm going to be the best college football tight end, or the best college football defensive end someday." But I thought we really saw him show that passion early on. It was reflected when they had that defensive stop after the big chunk play and were able to force that field goal, make it a 7-3 game instead of UCLA tying the game in the second quarter. It was because he made back-to-back plays on the quarterback. He had a pass breakup. He helped him get the quarterback out of bounds the next play. And I just thought overall, Daniel, you look at what Zane Durant continues to give you on the interior. I thought Amin Vanover had a really nice day, the guy who's been the second team defensive end for this group. And that is just something that will travel. It will weather the storm when it gets cold and snowy. This defensive front ain't going anywhere. As long as these key figures are available and you keep rotating and keeping it fresh. Deion Barnes done a great job with that the last couple of seasons. This is as advertised, I think. And the next 7 games, I think steps will be taken forward, because you're going to get to see them operate for 4 quarters, get to see these guys really getting after it in the fourth quarter, pin their ears back a little bit more, rather than getting a chance to take the gas off the pedal and have a chance to go watch some football. I think the better days are ahead of this group.
Yeah, I think the players that you highlighted had really, really nice days. I think that Abdul Carter, he's rushing from the second level. He's dropping back and spying a little bit in coverage. They're really opening things up for him a little bit. I mean, that Zane Durant and Amin Vanover splitting that sack. I mean, if anyone has the chance to go back and watch that effort, I mean, Zane Durant had to climb over Jalen Reed essentially because they were rushing next to each other, and the UCLA blocker just tackled Reed from behind, and Durant got slowed up a little bit, but still got to the quarterback. Durant is just playing at a really high level. To quote James Franklin, impactful. And then one more guy. I mean, Jalen Reed, he had
Mhm.
a really nice sack. UCLA got a really fortunate bounce on the fumble that he forced.
That was one of the
Where
most fortunate bounces I've ever seen. And the ball found the quarterback. I don't think he was looking for the ball. It just landed right back with him after that fumble. Otherwise, you're probably going to see a Penn State defender landing in the end zone with that ball.
I mean, in real time, like I was kind of out of the corner of my eye because I was typing something down and I didn't even realize he fumbled until after the fact because the motion was just so smooth. But you just have guys that are flashing consistently, and then you have someone like we talked about, Zachy Wheatley making that stop. I think Tony Rojas has been around the ball a little bit. I think we didn't really talk about the corners today, which is a good thing. I think that's one of the positions you put that into the good category when that happens. So I think this defense, they have the pieces, they have the talent. I think it's coming together over the course of 60 minutes. I think that first 15, 20 minutes is really where we're going to be in focus next week against USC.
Alonzo Ford stepped up on
Yes.
the defensive interior too. He had a big day for himself, working his way back from that injury last year. Didn't get to see him after he transferred in from Old Dominion. And we mentioned Wheatley, but he's a guy who has really been integral to everything they want to accomplish on defense since this KJ Winston injury. Gives them a little more flexibility with Jalen Reed because of their trust in Wheatley. He had a big fourth down stop, and I'm glad they were not quick to eject him or give that targeting penalty that early on in the game, because that would have been a brutal loss for the Nittany Lions. It would have been unfair. Nice to see them review it, come out. It ended up not being a targeting call, and he was able to play the rest of the way and play well. Aside from Nick Singleton, who we mentioned at great length already, Anthony Donko is on that players to monitor list coming out of this game. He exited relatively early during the first half of action. We didn't see the specifics of that injury. We are unlikely to find out the specifics in a way that we can broadcast on a podcast, but we do know that he's going to be one to watch because he didn't get back into this game. Nolan Rucci was the guy at right tackle the rest of the way. Confidence is high in his ability. I thought he looked good today. We saw like 7 offensive linemen involved at different times. At the same time, that's 7 different guys. And we'll talk about some of those looks that Andy Kotelnicki put out there. He gave USC a lot to digest, but something to know there on the offensive line. We did see JB Nelson back on the field. We did see Sal Wormley back on the field. These were guys that exited last week. We did see Dom DeLuca back on the field, by the way, at linebacker. He got a start today. But Kobe King's the other one we're going to monitor because Tyler Elsdon was working at the Mike linebacker for at least much of the second half, if not the entire second half. We're going to go kind of get a second look at that. But I don't think this is the first time this season we've seen Kobe King take a step back later in a game and see a guy like Tyler Elsdon getting more work at the Mike position. We know Kobe King gets logged with a ton of snaps in some of these big time matchups. Maybe this is a load maintenance situation for Kobe King because he was very much engaged on the sideline, wasn't pouting. If he was dealing with an injury, no one was really paying attention to it. He still had his helmet, so it wasn't anything where a guy's standing on the sideline, maybe looking a little dazed or looking, kind of bummed out, doesn't have his helmet in his hand, which we see sometimes. So I don't really know what to offer on Kobe King. Again, leads me to believe it's not something that we really need to be worried about. But I think Anthony Donka, just considering the guy left early, didn't come back. He's been playing at a pretty high level as a redshirt freshman at the right tackle position. That's one that's a bit more notable, along with Nick Singleton, and we'll see if anything else pops up early in the week.
Yeah, I think that group of players is interesting because it's that kind of Jenga tower where if you take too many of these pieces out, things can start to get a little shaky, and that depth that looks really good in August can look a little bit different in October. The Kobe King one is interesting. Like you said, it seems like there are a couple games earlier this year where he didn't get a lot of work as the game went on, but we'll see. I think that it's going to be a lot of eyes on a lot of spots on Wednesday night when we're back at the practice field.
Yeah, Kobe, of course, is a defensive captain, one of 2, and you lost the other one in KJ Winston, at least long term. All right, Daniel, that's going to be it from us from Beaver Stadium. I think we're ready to check out.
Can I do one more thing to mention from today? I think we got to mention Vanga Ioane.
Oh my gosh, thank you. People would have killed us for not doing that. Go ahead.
This is the second week in a row that you have a Penn State player make a viral block where I think Nick Singleton, it was the totality of that play where he did 3 different things at a pretty impressive level. But for Vanga Ioane, it's coming around the corner and just laying the wood on a UCLA player.
Oh.
And I think everyone saw it. Everyone knew it was coming. I talked to Vanga after the game, and because after he did it, he started celebrating. He had his hands up in the air, and I asked him about that, and he said that because of the reaction that the play got, he thought Katron Allen had scored, and that is Vanga's reaction when they score a touchdown. He likes to hype up the crowd, and he didn't realize that the reaction was to him until he saw up on the video board when they were replaying the block, and he saw the play and heard even more reaction. So it was just a very, very, I think, cool play. It's like, we talk about all the gadgetry in Andy Kotelnicki's offense, and it's fun to see it come together in a way like that. Talking to some of the players afterwards, they said that there is an unnamed Penn State player who was on the receiving end of that block in practice, and it was worse than what that UCLA player got. Harrison Wallace said that that's staying behind the scenes. I think Tony Rojas said that he's not going to reveal the identity of that victim. But yeah, I think Ioane was like, the way that he described his mindset was that he was lined up, he saw the player that he was going to block, and he was like, all right, like, let's do it. And we all saw what happened. So I think that, he's playing at such a high level overall. So I think to add this sort of gadgetry and get a little bit more attention on him, because, a left guard usually doesn't get a lot of shine. So I thought that was pretty cool. And he said that he really appreciates the trust that Andy Kotelnicki has in him. He said that they were in the locker room and celebrating after the game, and Kotelnicki was like, wasn't that awesome? Like, you were great, whatever. And Vanga's response was just, thank you for trusting me to do that. So I think Ioane is someone who is having a breakout year right now, and I think that his highlight reel at the end of the year is going to be a good one.
I think he's been an all Big Ten caliber player as a redshirt sophomore. And, we're starting to get to the point in the season where we can start to kind of talk about those statements in a body of work. And he's played as much as anybody on the offensive side of the football. Do you remember one of the first things I tweeted after Kotelnicki was officially hired? It was that video of Kansas using an offensive lineman in motion in the backfield, him laying a big block. And I quote tweeted it, and I said, give me this on the first play of Penn State's season with Venga Ioane. I think they had it in the first drive of the season or the first quarter of the season. And we've seen it pop up ever since. The biggest guy on the roster in motion, and then just boom, an explosion after that. Been fun to watch. And again, USC's got a lot of stuff to work through on the film from these first 5 games with Andy Kotelnicki. A lot of guys involved out there. Daniel, you, me, Mark will regroup on Monday, give our final thoughts on this matchup, start to set the stage for USC. We'll also be fresh out of a press conference with James Franklin that afternoon, so we will have new intel on what's happening with this roster, with Nick Singleton, and how he feels coming out of that performance, which is a 27-11 victory over UCLA. New top 25 poll will come out tomorrow. We'll have coverage of all things UCLA, Penn State, and setting the stage, as I said, for what's going to be a spotlight showdown here in the Big Ten out in Los Angeles, as strange as that sounds. For Daniel Gallen, I'm Tyler Donahue. This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast from Beaver Stadium.